I still remember the sound of my daughter's laughter as she let my gift slip from her hands and watched it sink into the fountain at her wedding. 30 years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and silent struggles disappeared in a single splash. She looked at me and said it was worthless, like my life had never mattered. In that moment, something inside me cracked. I realized I was not just losing her respect, I was losing my place in her heart. What she did not know was that her cruelty was about to uncover a truth that would change everything. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Whitmore, and I was 58 years old when I finally realized how invisible I had become to the people who mattered most to me. I lived in a small one-room apartment near the edge of Newport, Oregon, where the ocean wind rattled my windows every night and the scent of salt never quite left the air. The place cost $800 a month and had been my home for almost 3 decades. One narrow bed, a tiny kitchen, a folding table by the window, and shelves filled with library books I never had time to finish. It was not much, but it was clean, quiet, and mine. Every weekday, I worked at the community library from 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, shelving books, helping seniors with computer forms, and organizing children's reading programs. At night, I cleaned an elementary school 3 miles away. From 10 in the evening until 4 in the morning, I wiped desks, emptied trash bins, and mopped hallways that smelled of crayons and disinfectant. It was honest work. It always had been. I raised my daughter Emily on those 2 jobs. Her father left when she was 6. He said he wanted more from life than small towns and secondhand furniture. He never sent money. He never called. After that, it was just me and Emily against the world. I packed her lunches, walked her to school, stayed up late helping with homework, and learned how to stretch $20 until it felt like 100. In the early 1990s, while cleaning offices at night, I overheard businessmen talking about shipping routes, warehouse leases, and port expansions. I did not understand everything, but I listened. Then I went to the public library and taught myself. I read investment manuals, trade journals, and financial reports. Slowly, carefully, I began buying small shares in logistics companies and port facilities. I never gambled. I never rushed. I reinvested every dollar. Over time, those quiet decisions grew into something most people would never associate with a woman who pushed a mop. But I never told Emily. I chose to live simply because I wanted her to respect work, not wealth. I wanted her to believe that dignity came from effort, not from price tags. So I kept driving my old sedan, shopping at thrift stores, and cooking meals that fit into plastic containers. When Emily announced her engagement to Nathan Brooks, I was happy for her. Truly happy. He was polished, ambitious, and confident. He worked in finance. His family owned a large home outside Portland. They talked about investments and vacation homes the way I talked about grocery coupons. Her wedding was scheduled at Seaview Cliffs Resort, a place perched on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, all white stone and glass balconies. When I saw the photos online, I almost closed my laptop. It looked like something from another world. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, smoothing the wrinkles from my navy blue dress. I had bought it from a department store clearance rack 2 years earlier and saved it for special occasions. I pinned my hair back, applied light makeup, and looked at myself for a long time. I was proud of my daughter. I was nervous about being judged. I was afraid of being out of place. When I arrived at the resort, luxury surrounded me. Valet drivers in pressed uniforms, guests in designer suits, women in silk dresses and diamond earrings. Conversations about stock portfolios and real estate deals floated through the air. No one noticed me. I walked past them quietly, holding my purse close, hoping that somewhere in that crowd, Emily still saw me as her mother and not as something she needed to hide. In my bag, I carried a gift that represented 25 years of sacrifice, and I had no idea how little it would mean to her. If you are still watching and already feeling the emotional weight of this story, comment number 1 below to let me know you are with me, because what happened at the wedding next was even more painful than I ever imagined. Now, let us move on to Chapter 2. The reception at Seaview Cliffs Resort unfolded like something from a magazine. White linen tables stretched across the ocean terrace. Crystal glasses caught the afternoon sunlight and scattered it into tiny rainbows. Soft music drifted through the hidden speakers, blending with the distant sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. Everywhere I looked, people were laughing, taking photographs, and raising glasses to celebrate a future that looked flawless from the outside. I stood near the edge of the crowd, holding my purse with both hands, waiting. Inside that purse was a small wooden box I had carved myself over many quiet evenings. My fingers still remembered the way the wood had resisted at first, then slowly softened under careful pressure. I had sanded every edge until it felt smooth and warm. Inside, I had placed my savings book and a letter I had written and rewritten more times than I could count. In that letter, I told Emily about the nights I stayed awake worrying about bills, about the mornings I packed her lunch even when I had not slept, about how proud I was of the woman she had become. It was the most honest thing I had ever written. I waited until Emily stepped away from the photographers and her new in-laws. For a brief moment, she stood alone near the decorative fountain, adjusting her veil and taking slow breaths. She looked beautiful and fragile at the same time, like someone balancing on the edge of a new life. I walked toward her. With every step, my heart beat faster. I worried that I would say the wrong thing, that I would embarrass her, that I would somehow remind her of everything she had tried to leave behind. Still, I forced myself forward. A mother should not be afraid of her own child. When I reached her, I smiled and handed her the box. She looked down at it, then up at me. For a second, I saw confusion in her eyes. Then I saw something worse, discomfort. Her gaze flicked toward Nathan and his parents, who were standing nearby. His mother's lips tightened slightly. His father raised an eyebrow. Nathan glanced over and smirked, as if he had already guessed what kind of gift it would be. Emily hesitated before opening the lid. When she did, the sunlight caught the pages of the savings book and the folded letter. Nothing glittered. Nothing sparkled. There were no diamonds, no luxury brand logos, no dramatic gestures. Just my life, neatly contained in a small wooden box. Nathan leaned closer, peering inside. His expression shifted from curiosity to amusement. Someone behind us let out a small laugh. I felt the air around us change, as if an invisible wall had formed. Emily's cheeks flushed. She closed the box quickly. Then she said it. "This gift is worthless, Mom." Her voice was not loud, but it was sharp enough to cut. Before I could react, before I could explain, before I could even breathe properly, she lifted the box and dropped it into the fountain beside us. It hit the water with a soft splash and sank halfway before floating back up, rocking gently among the decorative stones. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone laughed. Another person whispered. A few phones lifted discreetly, capturing what they thought was an amusing scene. I stood there, unable to move. My ears rang, my hands felt numb. It was as if 25 years of effort had been reduced to a small ripple on the surface of clear water. Slowly, I bent down, removed my shoes, and reached into the fountain. The water was cold against my skin. I lifted the dripping box, holding it carefully as if it were still fragile. Emily had already turned away. Nathan was guiding her toward another group of guests. His parents followed, their attention completely elsewhere. No one stopped me as I walked past the tables, past the laughter, past the music. I left the resort with wet hands, a broken heart, and the quiet understanding that something between my daughter and me had changed forever. If you are still here and shocked by what she did to me in front of everyone, comment number 2 below to show your support. Because what I discovered that night at home changed everything. Now, let us move on to chapter 3. I returned to my apartment long after the wedding reception had ended, long after the laughter had faded, and the last guest had driven away from the glowing resort on the cliffs. The sky over Newport was dark and heavy, and the ocean wind followed me up the narrow stairs to my door like an unwelcome companion. When I stepped inside, everything was silent. No music, no voices, only the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant rhythm of waves. I set my purse on the small folding table and placed the wooden box beside it. Water still clung to its edges, dripping slowly onto the faded cloth underneath. The savings book inside was damp. My letter was wrinkled and stained, its ink slightly blurred. I stared at it for a long time, unable to bring myself to open it. I did not cry. Somewhere along the way, I had learned that tears were a luxury I could not afford. They never paid bills. They never fixed broken things. They only postponed decisions that still had to be made. I boiled water, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. Headlights passed along the coastal highway below, appearing and disappearing like brief flashes of other people's lives moving forward. My reflection in the glass looked older than it had that morning, not because of wrinkles, but because something inside me had shifted. After midnight, I stood and walked toward the bookshelf against the far wall. Most visitors assumed it held nothing but novels and library manuals. They never noticed that one shelf was slightly deeper than the others. Years ago, I had arranged it that way on purpose. Behind it, hidden by careful placement and habit, was a small steel safe bolted into the wall. I removed several books and slid the panel aside. The lock opened with a familiar click. Inside were folders arranged by a year and category: investment statements, port authority contracts, stock certificates, trust agreements, tax records going back decades. Everything I had built quietly, stored in neat rows like evidence in a private courtroom no one else was allowed to enter. I pulled out the thick blue folder labeled Coastal Holdings. As I flipped through it, I felt the familiar mixture of pride and disbelief. Shares in logistics companies, minority ownership in 2 port facilities, partnerships in warehouse developments, conservative investments, chosen carefully and nurtured patiently over 30 years. My life's work, hidden behind paper and ink. Then I noticed something out of place. A thin beige envelope sat between 2 official reports. I pulled it free and opened it. Inside were mortgage documents dated 8 months earlier. My name was printed clearly at the top. So was Emily's. At first, I assumed it had to be a mistake, a clerical error, a misfiled document, something easily explained. But as I read further, my hands began to shake. The papers showed that one of my investment properties had been used as collateral for a private loan. A loan issued to Nathan Brooks. My signature appeared at the bottom. It was not my handwriting. I studied it carefully. every curve, every line. It was a copy. A good one, but not mine. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed, the papers still in my hands. Another page listed Emily as a secondary guarantor. Her name was real. Her signature looked real. My chest tightened. Had she known what she was signing? Had she trusted her husband without question, or had she been pressured into something she did not understand? I thought about the conversations she had avoided, the paperwork she mentioned vaguely, the meetings she never explained. I had never pushed. I had told myself that giving her space meant respecting her independence. Now I wondered if it had meant abandoning her to danger. Anger rose suddenly in my chest, not toward Emily, toward myself, for believing that silence was wisdom, for thinking that staying invisible would keep her safe, for assuming that love alone was enough to protect her. I closed the folder carefully and returned it to the safe. Then I sat on my bed and stared at the wall until the sky outside began to lighten. Whatever had been done in my name, whatever trap my daughter had walked into, I would uncover it. Quietly, carefully, and on my own terms. If you are still watching and starting to realize how deep this situation really goes, comment number 3 below, so I know you are following this journey, because the choices I made next could have destroyed my family forever. Now, let us move on to chapter 4. I did not sleep that night. I lay on my narrow bed, listening to the wind scrape against the side of my building and the distant horns of cargo ships moving through the harbor. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's signature on those papers. Every time I tried to relax my breathing, another question surfaced. How long had this been happening? How much did she know? How much had Nathan hidden from her? By morning, my head ached and my body felt heavy, but my mind was painfully clear. I could call her. I could demand answers. I could drive to her apartment and place the documents in front of her and ask her why she had signed something that put both of us at risk. But I did none of those things because I knew my daughter. If I confronted her without proof, she would panic. She would defend her husband. She would feel attacked. Fear would push her deeper into the denial. And if Nathan sensed danger, he would move faster, hide better, erase traces before I understood what I was dealing with. So I chose silence. Not the silence of weakness, but the silence of strategy. After my shift at the library, I walked 3 blocks to a small cafe near the marina, ordered black coffee, and opened my notebook. On the first page, I wrote Nathan's name. Under it, I listed everything I knew: his employer, his business partners, his recent purchases, his sudden lifestyle changes, his unexplained trips. It was not much, but it was a beginning. That evening, I searched through old financial contacts I had gathered over the years, people I had met through shareholder meetings, property negotiations, and advisory boards. Most of them barely remembered me. To them, I was a quiet woman who asked careful questions and never demanded attention. One name stood out: Rachel Moore. She had once handled a compliance review for a port investment group I was part of. Precise, discreet, unimpressed by appearances. She had retired from corporate auditing and started working as a private financial investigator. I sent her a short message. We met 3 days later in a quiet diner outside Lincoln City. She looked nothing like the dramatic investigators from television. No trench coat, no dark glasses, just a woman in her late 40s wearing a gray sweater and practical shoes, drinking tea slowly. I did not tell her everything. At first, I showed her only the mortgage documents and my forged signature. She studied them carefully, her expression unreadable. Then she asked calm, measured questions about Nathan's employment, income, and recent behavior. I answered honestly. Within a week, she called me back. What she had found was troubling. Nathan's financial activity did not match his reported salary. Several shell companies were linked to his name through relatives. Large sums moved between accounts with no clear purpose. Some of the transactions were routed through offshore intermediaries. It was not proof of a crime, but it was a warning. I felt my stomach tighten as she explained. If Emily was connected to any of it, even unknowingly, she could be dragged into legal trouble. That thought terrified me more than any personal betrayal. At night, I sat at my folding table, sorting documents into labeled folders: bank statements, investment records, trust agreements, emails I had saved without knowing why. I worked until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped. As I organized evidence, memories surfaced. Emily at 8 years old, waiting for me outside the school office because I was late after a cleaning shift. Emily at 15, pretending not to care when her friends teased her about my uniform. Emily at 25, standing in a wedding dress, ashamed of my gift. I had spent my life protecting her from hardship. I was not about to stop now. Whatever Nathan was hiding, I would uncover it. Quietly, carefully, and without destroying my daughter in the process. If you are still with me and feeling the tension building, comment number 4 below to let me know you are still here. Because once I took my next step, there was no turning back. Now, let us move on to Chapter 5. The first signs of collapse arrived quietly, the way storms often do along the Oregon coast. No thunder, no warning, just a slow change in the air that made it harder to breathe. Rachel began sending me updates every few days, short messages at first, carefully worded, never dramatic. Each one added another thread to a pattern that was becoming impossible to ignore. Nathan's financial activity showed increasing urgency. Transfers were larger. The timing was erratic. Money moved through temporary holding companies that existed only on paper, then vanished again. None of it aligned with legitimate business growth. I read every report twice, sometimes 3 times, not because I doubted her work, but because I needed to understand the full shape of what I was dealing with. This was no longer a matter of questionable judgment. It was a deliberate structure built to hide risk and shift blame. With each update, the weight in my chest grew heavier. I did not want to be right, but the evidence did not care what I wanted. After a week of restless nights, I made a decision I had been avoiding. I contacted my legal counsel and instructed them to begin withdrawing my holdings from the investment fund connected to Seaview Cliffs Resort. The process was technical and methodical. Notices were sent, timelines were set, clauses were enforced. I did not announce anything publicly. I did not explain my reasons. I simply removed my support. Within days, the effects rippled outward. Bookings at the resort were paused pending financial review. Vendors began requesting payment confirmations. A construction upgrade Nathan had been planning was suddenly put on hold. The flow of easy money he had relied on tightened without warning. Rachel confirmed what I already suspected. Nathan had leveraged future revenue that no longer existed. Pressure changed people. I saw it in the messages Emily sent me. Shorter, more anxious, questions without details. She mentioned stress, unexpected expenses, things not going according to plan. She did not ask for help, not yet, but the strain was there, threaded through every word. According to Rachel, Nathan's behavior had shifted dramatically. He argued with partners, missed meetings, spoke aggressively to people who questioned him. He began rewriting agreements, adjusting dates, altering digital records. Each change was small enough to seem harmless on its own. Together, they formed something far more dangerous. Then came the document that removed all doubt. Rachel sent me a copy of a revised contract Nathan had filed 2 months earlier. In it, liability clauses had been subtly altered. Responsibility for certain debts had been reassigned. The language was precise, technical, and intentional. Emily's name appeared where it should not have. Nathan had not made a mistake. He had planned this. I sat at my table that night with the document spread in front of me, my hands steady, my thoughts anything but. There was a moment when anger surged so sharply that it took my breath away. Not the hot anger of betrayal, but the cold realization of how close my daughter had come to being destroyed by someone she trusted completely. This was no longer about money. It was about survival. I understood then that there was no path backward, no quiet resolution, no gentle conversation that would untangle what had already been set in motion. Whatever came next would be painful, public, irreversible. I gathered every piece of evidence I had and organized it into a single file. I labeled it clearly and placed it at the front of my safe. When I closed the door and slid the bookshelf back into place, my reflection stared back at me from the glass. Older, harder, but clearer than it had ever been. The collapse had begun, and there would be no stopping it now. By the time Rachel confirmed that Nathan had begun shifting liability onto Emily's name, I knew I was standing at the edge of a decision that would change everything. There was no safe middle ground left, no quiet corner where I could hide and hope the storm would pass. Every document I touched, every account I reviewed, every altered contract pointed in the same direction. If I hesitated any longer, my daughter would pay the price. For days, I carried that knowledge like a weight in my chest. At the library, I found myself staring at shelves without seeing the titles. At night, while mopping empty classrooms, my thoughts looped endlessly through worst-case scenarios, courtrooms, headlines, frozen accounts, legal fees, Emily sitting alone in an apartment she could no longer afford, wondering how her life had unraveled so quickly. I had spent my entire adult life preparing for emergencies. I had saved for illness, for unemployment, for storms and recessions and unexpected losses. But nothing in my careful planning had prepared me for this. Protecting my daughter now meant exposing her husband, and that meant exposing her marriage. One evening, I spread every document across my folding table: bank records, forged signatures, altered contracts, transaction histories, Rachel's detailed reports. It looked like evidence in a trial, not paperwork from a mother's apartment. I sat there for hours, reading and rereading everything until my eyes burned. I thought about calling Emily. I imagined telling her gently that something was wrong, that she needed to be careful, that she should look at her finances more closely. But I knew how it would go. She would defend Nathan. She would accuse me of overreacting. She would think I was trying to control her life. Love makes people blind. I had been blind once too. Near midnight, I opened my laptop and began researching federal financial reporting channels. I read every guideline, every confidentiality rule, every protection clause. I learned how to submit evidence securely, how to protect third parties, how to request witness safeguards. This was not revenge. This was intervention. When I finally contacted the Department of Justice Financial Crimes Division, I did so with a calmness that surprised even me. I submitted everything, every file, every timeline, every cross-reference. I included documentation proving that Emily had not initiated any of the questionable transactions and had no access to offshore accounts. I made sure they understood one thing clearly. My daughter was a victim, not a participant. After that, I sent a message to Emily. It was short, neutral, careful. I asked her to meet me at Seaview Cliffs Resort the following Saturday afternoon. I told her it was important and that she needed to come alone. I did not explain further. She replied within minutes, confused but willing. Then I contacted Rachel and informed her of my decision. She did not try to talk me out of it. She only said that I had done everything possible to protect Emily and that the truth, painful as it was, would ultimately free her. That night, I slept for the first time in weeks. Not because I felt peaceful, but because I knew I had chosen action over fear. Whatever happened next, I would face it standing. If you are still watching and wondering how far this would go, comment number 6 below to tell me you are ready for the truth. Because what happened next shattered everything in public. Now, let us move on to Chapter 7. I arrived at Seaview Cliffs Resort almost an hour early. The parking lot was nearly empty, the ocean hidden behind a thin veil of morning fog. The white stone buildings looked peaceful in the soft light, as if nothing painful had ever happened within their walls. I sat in my car for several minutes before stepping out, gripping the steering wheel until my hands stopped trembling. Inside, the main terrace had been cleared of wedding decorations, but traces of celebration still lingered. Faint marks on the floor where tables had stood, pale outlines on the walls where flowers had once been arranged. It felt like standing inside a memory that no longer belonged to me. I chose a bench near the fountain and waited. With every passing minute, my heart beat harder. My mouth was dry. My shoulders were tight. I reminded myself to breathe slowly, to stay grounded, to remain calm no matter what happened. At exactly 2:15, Emily arrived. She stepped out of her car cautiously, scanning the area as if expecting bad news to materialize in front of her. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater, nothing like the woman who had floated through this space in silk weeks earlier. When she saw me, relief and confusion crossed her face. She walked toward me, hesitated, then sat beside me. She asked why I had insisted on meeting here. I told her that she would understand soon. 10 minutes later, another car pulled in. Nathan. He got out quickly, slamming the door harder than necessary. His tie was crooked, his jacket wrinkled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He tried to look confident, but his hands betrayed him, clenching and unclenching at his sides. Behind him, his parents emerged more slowly, their expressions tight and guarded. The four of them approached together. Nathan demanded to know what this was about. Before I could answer, black vehicles rolled quietly into the lot. They parked near the entrance. 2 men and a woman stepped out, wearing plain clothes and calm expressions. Federal agents. The air seemed to freeze. Nathan noticed them first. His face drained of color. He took a step backward. One of the agents approached and identified herself. Her voice was steady, professional, and unmistakably serious. She informed Nathan that he was under investigation for financial fraud, identity misuse, and conspiracy to defraud lenders. Nathan laughed weakly and said there had to be a mistake. No one responded. Another agent presented documents, bank records, contracts, transfer histories, evidence. Nathan's breathing became rapid and uneven. He looked at Emily, then at me, then back at the agents. He denied everything at first. Then his voice cracked. Then he went silent. Handcuffs clicked into place with a sound that echoed far too loudly in the open space. Guests from nearby buildings began to gather at a distance. Staff members stopped working. Phones appeared in hands. A life was unraveling in public. Emily stood frozen, her hands pressed against her mouth. When Nathan was led away, he turned once, desperation in his eyes, and tried to say her name. She did not answer. She sank onto the bench beside me, her body shaking. I did not speak. I placed my hand gently on her back. The ocean continued crashing against the cliffs, indifferent to everything we had just lost. The days after Nathan's arrest passed in a blur of silence, headlines, and unanswered questions. Local news stations ran short segments about the investigation. Online articles speculated about hidden accounts and international transfers. Strangers dissected my daughter's life as if it were entertainment. Some blamed her. Some pitied her. None of them knew her. Emily stopped answering most calls. She rarely left her apartment. The curtains stayed closed, dishes piled up in the sink, laundry sat untouched in baskets. When I visited, she moved slowly, as if carrying invisible weight on her shoulders. Her laughter was gone. Her confidence had evaporated. I did not lecture her. I brought groceries. I cleaned quietly. I made soup and left containers in her refrigerator. I folded her clothes without comment. Sometimes we sat together without speaking, listening to the hum of traffic outside. 3 weeks after the arrest, her lawyer confirmed what I had worked so hard to secure. Emily had no criminal liability. Investigators had verified that she had no access to the manipulated accounts and no knowledge of the offshore transfers. Her name would not appear in any indictments. She cried when she heard, not from relief alone, but from exhaustion. Financially, everything collapsed. Credit cards were frozen, accounts were reviewed, luxury subscriptions disappeared. The apartment she had shared with Nathan was no longer affordable. She moved into a smaller place near the marina, 1 bedroom, outdated appliances, thin walls. For the first time in her adult life, she felt unstable. That was when I told her about the foundation. For years, I had quietly funded vocational training programs for women over 40 who had lost careers, marriages, or financial security. Sewing certification, bookkeeping classes, healthcare support training, small business workshops. I had never attached my name publicly. I had never sought recognition. I asked her if she wanted to work there, not as a director, not as a beneficiary, as a trainee coordinator, entry level, no salary for 6 months. No exceptions. She stared at me for a long time after I explained. Then she nodded. Her first week was brutal. She arrived early and left late. She filed paperwork, answered phones, sorted donation inventories, cleaned storage rooms, learned compliance rules, took notes during every meeting, asked questions when she did not understand. At night, she went home exhausted. Her hands were rough. Her back hurt. Her confidence wavered. More than once, I saw her sitting in her car after work, staring at the steering wheel, gathering strength before driving home. But she did not quit. Weeks passed, then months. She began anticipating problems instead of reacting to them. She learned how budgets worked, how grant applications were reviewed, how accountability protected vulnerable people. She stopped dressing for appearance and started dressing for function. I watched quietly. The daughter who once feared embarrassment now embraced effort. One afternoon, I overheard her encouraging a woman twice her age who was afraid she would fail her certification exam. Emily spoke gently, patiently, without judgment. In that moment, I felt something loosen inside me. She was learning to stand on solid ground. Not built on money, built on character. If you are still here and proud of how far this journey has come, comment number 8 below to let me know you are still with me, because the ending of the story is not about revenge, it is about redemption. Now, let us move on to the final chapters. By the time autumn arrived, Seaview Cliffs Resort no longer looked like the place where my daughter had once thrown my gift into a fountain. The glass balconies had been repurposed into outdoor classrooms. The former reception hall had been divided into training spaces and shared offices. Where wedding planners once discussed floral arrangements, instructors now explained budgeting software and small business regulations. The luxury suites overlooking the ocean had been converted into temporary housing for women rebuilding their lives. The transformation had taken 8 months. Permits, contractors, community meetings, safety inspections, grant approvals. None of it was glamorous. All of it was necessary. I never appeared in press photos. When local newspapers wrote about the project, they mentioned anonymous investors and nonprofit partners. My name was buried in legal documents, exactly where I preferred it. I stood in the background at every public event, blending into crowds, listening more than speaking. Emily stood at the front. She had earned that place. As project coordinator, she managed schedules, resolved conflicts, and worked directly with instructors and residents. She carried a clipboard filled with handwritten notes and color-coded reminders. Her voice was calm. Her posture was confident. She no longer looked for approval in every face she passed. On opening day, families and trainees gathered in the courtyard where wedding guests had once posed for photographs. Folding chairs replaced designer seating. Paper banners replaced silk ribbons. A small stage held community leaders and educators, not celebrities. I watched from the edge of the crowd. Emily moved through groups with quiet efficiency, checking attendance lists, directing volunteers, helping a nervous woman find her assigned room. She remembered names. She remembered stories. She followed up on promises. I remembered another version of her. The one who had worried about appearances. The one who had been afraid of being associated with my life. The one who had dropped my gift into water because it did not look impressive enough. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone grounded. During a break, I saw her sitting with a former restaurant manager who had lost her job during an economic downturn. Emily listened closely as the woman described her fears about starting over. There was no impatience in her expression, no condescension, only attention. Something inside me settled. People who had once overlooked me now nodded politely when we passed. A few even asked questions about the foundation. Others offered donations or volunteer time. Their interest did not change who I was, but it confirmed something important. Respect grows from consistency, not display. Our relationship did not transform overnight. We did not suddenly become emotionally expressive or dramatic. We still struggled with awkward silences and unspoken regrets. But we shared routines now. Morning planning meetings, weekly budget reviews, quiet lunches in the staff kitchen. Work rebuilt what words could not. One evening, as the sun lowered over the ocean, Emily stood beside me on the terrace and watched residents returning from training sessions. Laughter drifted through open windows. Children played near the garden beds. She leaned slightly closer. Not a hug, not yet, but closer. After everything had been stripped away, what remained was not wealth or status. It was purpose, and it was enough. Most evenings, after the training center closed and the last lights dimmed along the cliffs, I returned to the same small apartment I had lived in for nearly 30 years. Nothing about my surroundings had changed. The narrow bed still stood beneath the window. The folding table still rested against the wall. The kettle still whistled too loudly when the water boiled. My shelves were still lined with borrowed library books and worn notebooks filled with financial calculations no one else would ever read. I could have moved. I could have bought a house overlooking the ocean or a quiet place in the hills, but I did not. This space reminded me who I was before anyone knew my name and who I would remain long after attention faded. On the wall above my desk hung a simple wooden frame. Inside it was the small box Emily had once dropped into the fountain. I had dried it carefully, repaired the softened edges, and preserved it as it was. The stains remained. The slight cracks in the wood were visible. The savings book and my letter rested inside, protected behind glass. It was not a trophy. It was a reminder. Every time I looked at it, I remembered the moment when my heart had broken and begun rebuilding itself at the same time. My evenings were quiet now. I cooked simple meals. I read. I planned budgets for upcoming programs. Sometimes I wrote letters to donors or reviewed grant proposals. Other nights, I sat by the window and listened to the ocean, letting the rhythm steady my thoughts. Emily called often, not out of obligation, out of choice. Sometimes she asked for advice about staff conflicts. Sometimes she shared small victories. A trainee who passed an exam, a resident who found stable employment, a program that exceeded its goals. Her voice was different, stronger, more thoughtful. She no longer spoke in rushes of excitement or panic. She spoke with balance. Our relationship was not perfect. We still carried memories that hurt. We still avoided certain topics. But we respected each other now, and respect was stronger than apology. One Saturday morning, she stopped by unexpectedly with coffee and homemade muffins. We sat at my table, talking about upcoming projects and staffing needs. Before she left, she paused in front of the framed box. She stood there quietly for a long time. Then she turned to me and said she finally understood what it meant. I nodded. Nothing more needed to be said. For years, I had believed that protecting my daughter meant hiding my struggles and minimizing my achievements. I thought humility required silence. I thought strength meant invisibility. I had been wrong. True strength was honesty. True legacy was not money passed down. It was values passed forward. I still worked at the library. I still cleaned when needed. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. There was dignity in contribution. There was meaning in service. My daughter once believed my gift was worthless. In truth, it was priceless. Not because of the money inside, but because of the lesson it carried. Some gifts cannot be thrown away. They grow, they endure, they become the foundation for everything that follows. Sometimes, the most painful moments in life are not meant to destroy us, but to reshape us. Loss, disappointment, and misunderstanding have a way of stripping away illusions and forcing us to see what truly matters. When status fades and appearances crumble, only character remains. True wealth is never measured by numbers on paper, but by the values we carry, the work we commit to, and the lives we quietly uplift along the way. Growth often begins where comfort ends. Forgiveness is not forgetting, but choosing to move forward with wisdom. And love, when guided by integrity, can rebuild what pride once shattered. Every hardship holds a lesson, and every lesson holds the power to transform a future. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If it touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel for more meaningful stories. Your support truly matters.